The smith was a priest who by certain rites could accelerate or cause the birth of metals. The furnace was an altar on which the rite was enacted. Forbes, 1971. Alright people, today let's talk a bit about metallurgy and magic. Research tells us that there is evidence for metallurgy to have started by accident, when a bushfire lit trees encapsulated by termite mounds. Remember, I already spoke several times about how important termite mounds are to prospectors who work for the mining industry. The termites mine the underground and bring up minerals which they add into their mound structures, allowing the prospectors to estimate present mineral veins. So a forest fire or a lightning strike might have indeed inspired the ancients to experiment. This has been proposed by archaeometallurgists of both India and Africa, dating the first metallurgical operations, and I mean the effective smelting of copper, back to at least 4000 BC. Iron making goes back to the beginning of the first millennium BC. The first blacksmith was a deity in so many cultures of the ancient world. We Westerners know him best as Hephaestus, or of the Greeks, or Vulcan of the Romans, and then there is Ilmarinen of the Finno-Ugric people. In the east there is Twaster of the Vedas, Ptah and Bes of Egypt. The divine smithy of Africa bears names like Ogun or Gu or Ikenga Nriauka. All of them share the same characteristics. Each smith or metal worker becomes a pupil of this great divine blacksmith and impersonates him when leading the ritual of metallurgical processes. The process of changing ore into metal through the use of fire is or was generally seen as sorcery or magic in Africa. The kind of magical practices that involve the assistance of ancestral spirits. Ritual, symbols and taboos are necessary for the protection of the craftsmen against these supernatural forces that are being employed. During this process, the men appropriate the feminine ability of giving birth by bringing metal into the world. The furnace is often explicitly identified with a woman, a virgin during the building and preparation process, and a woman during the smelting process. It would be provided with breasts and adorned with charms and gifts to activate and guard her fertility. The bloom dropping from the smelting compartment symbolizes the fruit of her womb. The whole process symbolizes the intercourse of blacksmith and metalworker with the female furnace. Every act involved, from coal burning to mining to forging, should be void of contact or sex with any other woman, even if it is his own spouse. It is this reenactment of primal creation, as was performed by this divine smithy, when he transformed undivided primal matter into all life on earth, that is imitated within the ritual from mining to eventual forging of life. In general, tool-making is considered a second creation, a re-establishment of the world in matter. The divine figure is the African Prometheus, the one who brings down the fire from the sky and teaches the secret art of using it to create. For what I read in the lore of different cultures, there are some indications pointing to the use of meteoric iron, especially for the use of for the fabrication of sacred knives and spears. He teaches the people how to domesticate animals and agriculture and how to master all elements. But the control of fire is the most sacred art, for it manages to transform the principles into a new creation. Therefore, lightning is seen as the establishment of this procreating union of the passive and active principle. The metallurgical process is a rite of passage, led by the elders who are respected for their experience and knowledge. The younger will assist them with labor. The cycle from mining to tool creation, the destruction and transformation of primal matter through the use of fire is how the smith also expresses the control over time. Ritual connects to the timelessness of the ancestral spirit, ancestral world. Sacrifice is needed because only from life can come. Sometimes during preparation, sacrifice is brought upon the furnace. The way the dying animal will fall and move is then read by the smith diviner. The complete process will be accompanied by a singer reciting the hymns that speak of the ways of the divine smith. Failure of the production will be explained with inappropriate sexual endeavors or marital problems by the metal workers, just like adultery is also considered the cause of miscarriages. To reduce the risk of seduction, a smelt would be conducted away from the village community in secrecy. But there are other reasons for this secrecy. The position of metal workers within African society was considerable. In general, they were seen as shamans or sorcerers by the uninitiated and were consulted when in need of advice, remedies, or charms. Metal jewelry was nothing other than charms for good luck, for protection, fertility, etc. They were not to be removed. Also, the production of tools is an act of powerful magic. A hoe or another tool is charged with spirit energy. The African craftsmen are not working on the material level solely. The creation happens on the invisible level as well. And while I was reading, I often had the impression that the African metal workers long had a more holistic idea of their labor, comparable with the early Western alchemists. As with the carving of the sacred masks, the artist is a mediator. The rituals involved charge the object made. That is essentially how the magic works for Africans, and how it used to work in other places as well in a distant past. Just like we saw in Middle America, axe-shaped currency was in use by several cultures, and metal trade developed rapidly during the early Middle Ages when African kingdoms became more powerful. Metal tools were a currency, or they made part of a bride treasure, or were used as political regalia of power. For those who watched my last video on set and the artwork, remember my comparison between the was scepter and a Neolithic adze or hoe. As of the quality of the product, there are several testimonies of the early colonizers praising the quality of the African ironwork, which they say was much better compared with that of Europe at that time. Metallurgist Robert James Forbes writes in his book Metallurgy in Antiquity, a notebook for archaeologists and technologists, how clans from the Katanga region in Central Africa extract malachite and smelt it to produce copper within only 2.5 hours. Instead of building a furnace, they assemble one using the already available cones of termite mounds. Also, the crucibles needed for the final melting process are made of termite cones. I linked a PDF to this work. I think It is a must-have, so go for it.
The furnace and tubes are made of clay, which itself is fireproof and durable. Not just any clay will do. The Bamako smiths use clay from termite mounds, which is especially useful because it is free of stones and other impurities. The termites simply are not strong enough to incorporate stones in their structures. Those who have studied African art know that the Igbo in Nigeria and many other peoples across Africa believe that clay from termite mounds is sacred because it comes from deep in the sacred earth. If you look closely at the clay in the basket, you can see the tunnels the termites have left. The elders break up the mounds and carry the pieces back to Dablo, where they pound the chunks into finer clay.
In the videos that I would like to recommend here, the reconstruction of the metallurgical process also mentions the use of termite clay for building the furnace. The termite clay increases the hardness of the furnace. Christopher Roy explains meticulously how the complete process develops. There are also a few older documentaries from the 80s and the 90s that I added in the playlist on my channel, so go check that out. The Iron Masters were high standard, and together with the women who performed pottery, they belonged to a segregated group within the community, securing the knowledge of transformation processes. Roy also has several videos on African ceramics. This craft is often performed, like I said, by women only, and often these ladies are the spouses of the blacksmiths or metal workers. They too form separated societies with the same layer of secrecy added. To answer the question of why the secrecy, some still refer to the sacred recreation and transformation of the primal elements with the use of fire, while other researchers will explain it as a means of protecting the trade, creating a large family caste with certain socio-political powers. The oldest reference to African secret societies brings them back to at least the 13th century. Then shortly on altars, they are often seen as a sacred spot within the community. These altars are made with all kinds of matter, each of them considered primarily linked to divinity. I found several mentions of the use of termite clay as one of the essential parts. This is also the case for the manufacture of other relics that play a big role in the local religious experience. The use of termite clay for ritual practice has long been alive in the Caribbean islands and South America in the voodoo cult. This is it. Although I know Africa has more to offer on the subject of ritual use of termite clay, I will leave a few links to interesting reads on all that underneath the video for you. I actually rushed through here and I apologize for leaving out so much factors which are worth mentioning, but it is time for me to move on.